Welcome to the Daily with me, Niall Paterson. Now, after more than a week of unrest, the tension isn't just palpable, well, it's pretty much unavoidable. Violence, arson, racist abuse, it's been on our streets and on our screens pretty much every evening. The police, well, they have to deal with the brunt of it, of course, but so too other emergency services, including paramedics and also NHS staff. Now, that in part is why the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, is talking of refusing non-emergency medical care to people who abuse them. And we'll have more on that just a little later. But it's the communities themselves that are most affected. As you may or may not know, we publish this podcast around about tea time every day. So with tens of protests expected around the country, after we hit send, we thought first we'd focus just a little on how people in those places are feeling. Tawhid Islam is a trustee for the Liverpool Region Mosque Network, an umbrella organisation for mosques in the area. Tawhid, great to have you on the podcast. You're in Liverpool right now. Just describe what it is feeling like there.
The atmosphere is really quite tense, Neil. There's a palpable sense in the air of uneasiness after everything that's happened over the last week or so. There's a real mixed bag of emotions. Essentially, the Muslim community or communities, they're grieving after the horrific killings in the dance class in Southport. Those are 3 beautiful lives that have been lost, and this escalation of violence on entirely false pretenses, stoking up terror, stoking up fear amongst communities that have always been working with each other, had always been so happy to be alongside each other and just getting on with just normal community life. And now there's this uneasy atmosphere in the air where people are worried to go to work, they're worried to go out. Obviously, it's been very uneasy, sort of, and that feeling of fear amongst the Muslim community is quite visible across Liverpool. I was in Liverpool city centre yesterday afternoon with my young children, and there was a real absence of families and children out, in the Liverpool city area. And that's very uncommon. We're in our summer holidays now. Weather was good. So you expect the real buzz in the air and lots of things happening. And I've never come across that in August before in Liverpool. So it's really quite disturbing. And I think because of different information that's coming out on a day-by-day basis, I think people in the communities are taking it sort of day by day in terms of what they're doing. Shall we go out? Shall we not? But there is definitely this hesitancy to go out and, perhaps work from home and do all those type of things to sort of stay inside. So the fear is very real. It's very visible, and it's really concerning. It will take time to heal the wounds that have been opened up from all of this violence.
And it strikes me, Todd, that it might well be quite a few days before we even anticipate being at that point. I mean, as we anticipate yet another evening of unrest, 2 words that you used there repeatedly, unease and fear. Has this community ever known something like this before?
Not on this scale. Not on this scale, no. It's really quite something that it's very hard for the community to process, because I don't think the community's ever been in this position before. This is taken off. After what happened on Tuesday night, where that road and the mosque in Southport was attacked, it's just escalated across the country. We saw huge demonstrations in Liverpool on Saturday, which turned extremely violent, and there was a lot of destruction. So no, we've never seen this type of action before in my lifetime, and we don't know how to come to terms with it. We don't know how to process it. It's quite new. It's very raw feeling in everyone in the community, and everyone seems to be very on edge. Everyone is on edge. Everyone seems to be on edge.
What precautions then are people taking? I mean, are you seeing some kind of, for example, avoiding attending masjid, attending the mosque?
Yes, definitely. Some of the mosques are actually closed based on police advice. I've noticed, I was at the largest mosque in Liverpool yesterday afternoon, and no women there at all. There was not one single woman attended the prayer. And in terms of the numbers that were coming to pray in total were very, very much reduced. There is definitely a hesitancy to go out to mosques, given that they have been targeted in the way that they have, and people are not sort of going and hanging around there. They're going, doing their prayers, and then they're just going straight home. There's no friendly talk or people sort of coming together and having a chat, which is, normal in a mosque. There, the community centres as well.
What I'm detecting from what you're saying, Todd, is that there are precautions being taken by pretty much everyone, that people are being cautious in a manner in which they perhaps never have done before.
Yes.
I mean, businesses in and around Liverpool, Asian-owned businesses, again, I suspect there is a constituency that will be very, very concerned as we head into the night. It's
not business as normal. Definitely not. It's let's see what happens, see what the police are saying, and obviously erring on the side of caution.
Telling people what is about to happen, or indeed is happening in a community, I suspect, is, as you've explained, it's not exactly straightforward, but not as complicated as explaining to people why what is going on in our streets is taking place. I mean, you mentioned you've kids yourself, Tawhid. I mean, what have you been saying to them?
It's a difficult one, Neil, to be honest with you. I don't want to. I mean, they're very young. They're 5 and 8. So
yeah, my boy's 8.
Yeah, so they know there's something going on. They know. And obviously myself and my wife have been discussing it at home, and children are like sponges and they absorb things. And what we've been trying to make them understand is that there's some unrest. We need to be careful and we need to be safe, but trying not to worry them too much by talking about it too much in front of them. But the fact that it's the summer holidays and they're not out and about consistently, they know that there's something wrong. And we just said, look, there's some people going about, up to no good. The police are on it, and everything will be okay, and trying to give them that reassurance so they don't worry themselves. But it's difficult. We're trying to keep them away from news and things like that, so they don't see those type of horrific scenes like we saw on Saturday. And I'm sure many families up and down the country are doing the same and trying to shield their children from what's happening. So, they have no memory of it, we hope, and that's all we can do.
Tawhid, thanks, and we will have more from him just a little later. But after the break, the government continues to respond to the riots, threatening withdrawal of access to the NHS if people abuse its staff. Stay there. Welcome back. The Prime Minister has said that the communities affected will be safe. Well, soon we'll find out. Meanwhile, the government continues to scale up its response to those participating and coordinating the riots. Prosecutions are now happening at pace, and the Health Secretary is warning that anyone racist to NHS staff can and should have their care refused. Ashish Joshi is Sky's health correspondent. And look, we're going to tackle the NHS in just a moment. But we've just been hearing from Tawhid Islam discussing the fear in his community, his concerns for his children, his friends. Now, I imagine, Ashish, you've been out and about reporting. I imagine that chimes with an awful lot that you've been seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. The community feels like they're under siege. And that, what does the word community mean? It just means people who will feel that they are being targeted, that they're vulnerable, that for whatever reason, maybe because if they're Muslim and the Muslim women wear hijabs, or if you're a Sikh and you wear a turban, or if you don't identify or present as a native white Englishman in the eyes of the people who are carrying out these atrocious attacks, people feel like they are under threat. They feel very scared. I've been out on Brentford High Street this morning. This is one of the areas in West London which has been identified by police and by the far right as somewhere that is going to be targeted because they have a large immigration office there. I think that's the reason why Brentford's been identified. So I spent the morning going in and out of every shop on the high street, every shop which I thought, or restaurant which I thought might be owned by an Asian shopkeeper, or might be targeted in any violence that may or may not happen later. Every single one is aware of what is happening. Every single one said to me, without exception, we are going to shut early. So these are livelihoods, right? These are shopkeepers who've had their businesses on this high street for decades, have never had any trouble before, and are suddenly looking over their shoulders and saying, we're going to have to shut at 5 instead of 10 because I'm afraid for me, my shop, my staff, and all the other customers who come in here. And Neil, I didn't go into people's homes. I didn't go into all of the homes that are around this neighbourhood. I just went into the shops that I thought might be shutting early. And I went in, and yes, without doubt, they all said they were.
Let's turn to the brief then for a second, Ashish, and some interesting words from the relatively new Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. His assertion is that NHS staff, if they encounter racism, can withdraw treatment. Just explain his thinking.
He has been worried by reports which have come out over the last week. One particular report he refers to in his interview where Filipino nurses, these were nurses who were not working on the day in Sunderland, who had been asked to come in and provide emergency cover because of the trouble in the area. They were targeted, they were attacked. These are Filipino nurses working for the NHS, going to work to provide emergency cover to anyone who'd been caught up in the violence. They were attacked. The Health Secretary said he's absolutely appalled. And what he has said, he has made it absolutely clear to all NHS trust leaders where NHS staff feel threatened, if they do not feel safe, they do not have to extend their duty of care to a racist patient. Those are his words. He said that.
Have NHS staff in the past not been able to refuse treatment in these circumstances?
I've never actually heard of a patient being refused care. We've had lots of instances where NHS staff have been abused, but the care is still administered to that patient because you would think that the trusts thought, we can't not offer care. So somebody will have to administer that care. This is the first time we've got it coming down from the very top that NHS staff who are threatened with racist abuse don't have to offer their care to that patient. So that means any staff can turn around and say to their trust leaders, we're not doing this. And they will be backed up by the Health Secretary.
Just remind us, to what extent does the health service of this country rely on people coming here to work on the front line of it from overseas?
Without overseas workers, without people of ethnic minority heritage, anyone who has come in, who's been born here with heritage from the Asian subcontinent, Africa, Asia, the West Indies, the Caribbean, any of these stuff, we would not have an NHS now. It would grind to a halt. We're talking about health leaders, consultants, doctors, surgeons, nurses, midwives, cleaners, porters, people who work in the canteens. Every part of the health service, one of the largest employers in the world, certainly one of the largest employers in the UK, 1.7 million people, I think, work for the NHS. The numbers are astronomical. You would just not have a functioning health system.
Thanks, Ashish. Well, let's return to Tawhid Islam of the Liverpool Region Mosque Network. Tawhid, do you look at what has been happening over the past week and a half and see any validity to the idea that this is not just Islamophobia pure and simple, but there are concerns about migration, about mass migration that haven't been addressed, and that is what we are seeing?
I genuinely believe that there are pockets of people who have gone to those protests and got caught up in the violence, and they genuinely have concerns. They genuinely have concerns, and they weren't there to cause senseless violence and got caught up in it. And they have questions, and they have legitimate concerns. And I think that can always be tackled by dialogue. But in terms of separating those genuine people and then the people who are there to just cause mayhem and destruction, it is very difficult. the doors to mosques are always open to answer questions, talk about things. But we can't look at this in a vacuum, Neil, in my opinion. I mean, this sentiment has been growing for a very, very long time. And it's years in the making. It's not a week in the making.
What then? Because of course it hasn't just been, young white men who've been on the streets. The majority of the time it clearly has. But there have been what some have referred to as counter protests, and I'm not sure whether that title is strictly true, but there have been young Asian men out on the streets in balaclavas, carrying weapons as well. What do you think about that? I mean, clearly from what you're saying, you think, the violent reaction is not justified. But what do you make of the individuals who see themselves as protecting their community in the way in which those young white men claim that they are protecting their community?
I would say that they need to take a step back and just look at what they're doing and the impact that what they will be doing will have. Violence perpetuates further violence. So the answer is never more violence. So the advice that the mosques and the community centres are giving to young people is to be vigilant, stay calm and be safe, and don't put yourselves in positions where you will potentially be up against situations where you might need to respond in a way that could get you into trouble. Essentially, we as the Muslim community, we need to respond as Muslims, and that will be to never accept that violence is the way to respond. We must listen to the authorities, and we must deal with things in a calm, calculated fashion. If people want to talk, we need to open the doors to have those conversations. And I think sometimes that the Muslim community is looked at and it's dehumanized because of what the rhetoric that's coming out of, elected officials, previous government, to dehumanize the Muslim community. So once people realize that actually, the Muslim community they're just normal people, we're all part of these communities, and they start putting a human face on it, they'll understand that maybe some of their concerns are the same concerns that Muslim people have, or however people are suffering. So there's that sort of commonality in all of these issues, and I think that the more we spend time with each other and talking to each other, obviously in the right forum, that can help to drive away this type of sentiment. But absolutely, any violence is absolutely the wrong way, and it cannot be condoned in any circumstances.
As the country prepares for another night of riots, it is difficult to conceive of dialogue as being the way through this, particularly when those currently making themselves heard most loudly are often screaming racist bile. But the unrest will not end simply through a show of force. When the dust has settled, well, that's when the hard work begins. That's your lot for this edition of The Daily. Look after yourselves. We'll be back again tomorrow.